world should be ruled by democracies.
I was interviewing you on television a couple of weeks back.
That's right.
And you said, if you really want to understand Jerusalem, why don't you come here and see it?
And you came.
Here I am.
Mass shooting after mass shooting after mass shooting. Why this cannot be fixed?
There are 425 million guns in the United States, which is more than the population.
The problem here is Trump has been able to make the argument that this is a political prosecution and that he's being singled out unfairly.
We defend our nation.
You are saying we could have a cure for cancer.
We'll have treatments for many cancers in this decade, and they're going to come from India.
Downside is that it could potentially wipe us out. But let's start with the upside first.
The upsides are absolutely enormous. The potential uses of this are almost unlimited.
I only discovered AutoGPTs about a week ago and started writing about them. And after I started writing about them, Jeff Bezos followed me on Twitter, and all kinds of crazy amounts of people have been contacting us.
The show where we get you the week's biggest stories from around this world.
What happens in the world and its nations?
South Africa.
In Samarkand, Uzbekistan.
Reporting from New York for WION.
Creates ripples across oceans.
As things appear to be quite tense, given that the protesters are just not backing down.
The federal government employees have been protesting.
So follow the news source where facts run the show.
Hello and a very warm welcome. Thanks very much for joining us here on Gravitas. I'm Molly Gambhir. Our cover story tonight is about India, and it's no ordinary story, by the way. It's about the country's extraordinary and phenomenal rise as a scientific power. You see, it has achieved numerous milestones, and tonight we tell you all about India's journey cutting across the space, nuclear and digital spheres. As India's largest home-built nuclear plant starts operations at full capacity, the country's space agency gears up to achieve yet another milestone with the Aditya L1 mission, and UPI transactions in India cross the 10 billion mark. It's a journey like no other, and we tell you all about it in just a bit. Also on the show for you tonight, is India moving towards one nation, one election? We tell you all about the speculation, the latest, and also a look at the challenges. As the countdown begins for the G20 summit to be held in India, we tell you all you need to know about how the country is gearing up to host the mega event. We also get to the story of how and why Africa and South Asia became fast fashion's dumping grounds. Where do you stand in the debate on sportsmanship versus geopolitics? Should the two even be linked? We tell you how an Iranian weightlifter has received a lifetime ban from competing after he simply shook hands with an Israeli athlete. Our cover story tonight is about the 21st century's rising scientific power. It is India's story. A story that every Indian should be proud of. In just over 12 hours from now, India will be sending another mission to space. Aditya L1. It is India's first space-based solar observatory. Aditya L1 will be launched by the PSLV rocket from the Satish Dhawan Space Center in Sriharikota. This is the same space center, by the way, where Chandrayaan 3 was launched from, and several other interesting missions will be launched from in the coming months. Aditya means sun. L refers to Lagrange point 1. There are 5 Lagrange points in total, and think of them as parking spots in space. India's mission will be placed on L1. It will have uninterrupted views of the sun. L1 is at a distance of around 1.5 million kilometers from planet Earth. And from there, Aditya L1 will be observing solar activities, watching how what happens in the sun impacts the weather in space. Aditya L1 will also be studying the topmost layers of the sun. It's called the corona. India's mission will study corona's temperature, velocity, density. There will be 7 payloads aboard Aditya L1. VELC, or the Visible Emission Line Coronagraph, will study the corona suit, or the Solar Ultraviolet Imaging Telescope will focus on the photosphere and chromosphere imaging. Solexis and Helios, or Solar Low Energy X-ray Spectrometer, and High Energy L1 Orbiting X-ray Spectrometer will study the sun's flares. And then you have ASPEX and PAPA, PAPA, or Aditya Solar Wind Particle Experiment and Plasma Analyzer Package for Aditya. And together, they will basically analyze the electrons and protons in the solar wind. And finally, the advanced triaxial high-resolution digital magnetometers will study the interplanetary magnetic field at L1 Lagrange point. And only a few countries have been able to send a lunar probe in space. The United States is a part of this club, as is China, the UK, Europe, Japan. Aditya L1 will be launching at 11:50 a.m. on the 2nd of September. You will be able to watch the blast-off live on WION, and as we count down to that mega launch, here's another milestone that India has achieved. India's largest indigenous nuclear power plant has started operations in full capacity. The plant is located in Gujarat's Kakrapar. Its commercial operations started in June, but till now the reactor was operating at 90% capacity. It is a 700 megawatt electric plant. For the Nuclear Power Corporation of India Limited, Kakrapar is just the beginning. It plans to build at least 16 700 megawatts pressurized heavy water reactors. Construction is already underway in Rawatbhata in Rajasthan and at Gorakhpur in Haryana. And I don't know if you know this, but for almost 34 years, India was largely excluded from trade in nuclear plant and material. And this was following India's first nuclear test in the year 1974. India turned this challenge into an opportunity and built its civil nuclear power program, largely without fuel or technological assistance from another country. And today, India has not just built its largest indigenous nuclear power plant, but also a payment system coveted by the world. I'm talking about UPI, or Unified Payments Interface. In August, UPI crossed 10 billion monthly transactions. The number is 10.58 billion to be precise, and this is an all-time high. In July, there were 9.96 billion UPI transactions in total. And over the last year, UPI transactions have surged 67%. NPCI, or the National Payments Corporation of India, is right. This feat deserves nothing less than a drum roll. From our neighborhood fruit seller to airline counters, today everyone has a UPI barcode in front of them. Making a payment is like a cakewalk. You don't need to carry cash or a card, nothing. Your phone is all you need. You can travel to another city with just your phone and your charger, and you will be fine. In fact, countries around the world are trying to adopt India's successful UPI system, and it has already become operational in Nepal as well as Bhutan. And Sri Lanka too will soon join the club. India is also partnering with Singapore to link the payment system so that the flow of remittances becomes a lot easier. The 10 billion milestone is a testimony to India's digital prowess. You see, India was always a leader in science and technology. It's just that India had lost its lead in this field somewhere along the way. Ancient India was the leader in science and technology and mathematics. Indian mathematician Aryabhat was the first to create the symbol of zero. India gave the world the decimal system, also numeral notations. As early as 500 BCE, Indians were using different symbols for different numbers. It was ancient India that came up with the number system. And today, it is called the Arabic numerals because the Arabs took it everywhere. By 3000 BCE, India was constructing canals and artificial lakes for irrigation. The Indus Valley civilization was using animal-drawn plows in 2500 BCE. Lothal in Gujarat had the world's earliest known dock. India was making steel as early as 500 BCE. And India was the first to melt zinc by distillation process. It's a long list. One India needs to be proud of. Also of the fact that today India is back on the front seat. It is 2023 and India has emerged as the rising scientific power of the 21st century. And you know what's even more beautiful? Despite all the achievements, India remains humble. Let me tell you a story. In the weeks and months leading up to the launch of Chandrayaan-3, ISRO found itself battling a big challenge. The scientists and the employees of ISRO had to work overtime and extra hard. And the bosses wanted to incentivize the workforce. And what better incentive than money? But ISRO did not have that option. Instead, India's Space Research Organization started offering free masala dosas and filter coffee for its staff at 5 p.m. every evening. Speaking to a US-based newspaper, ISRO's mission scientist Venkatesh Sharma has said the free coffee and dosa encouraged everyone to stay on longer. That says a lot about India and Indians' simplicity. We have reached the moon, become self-sufficient, become a global leader in digital payments, and yet we very much have our feet on the ground. Come the G20 summit, you will see India opening its home to the world, sharing its learnings, upholding the spirit of Vasudhaiv Kutumbakam, and more on it coming up in just a few minutes. Let me now ask you a question. How would you feel if your child was suddenly taken away from you one day? It's difficult to even imagine that, isn't it? And what if the entire thing was blamed on you, that you failed to take care of your child? It's probably one of the biggest nightmares for any parent. For some, it has unfortunately come true. This is late Priyadarshini Patil. She was an IT professional. She lived in Australia with her husband and 2 children. Her daughter, Aparajita Patil, is 13 years old. Son, Amartya Patil, is 17. Priyadarshini is no more. She died by suicide. Why? Due to heartbreak. You see, 2 years ago, Priyadarshini's family was torn apart by the Australian authorities. This is what actually happened. Amartya suffered from ulcerative colitis, a chronic inflammatory bowel disease. He had to be hospitalized for treatment. Weeks had passed. Amartya's health did not improve, and weeks turned into months. Half a year later, Amartya was still sick. And frustrated, Priyadarshini filed a legal complaint against the doctors. She claimed that the doctors were not providing proper treatment. What happened next? The doctors filed their own complaint in return. They told child welfare that it was improper care at home that was making Amartya ill. Priyadarshini's father says it was an act of revenge. And soon the authorities took action. Officials from Australia's Child Welfare Services met Priyadarshini and her husband. In fact, they inspected their house, even submitted 6 positive reports. However, in the 7th report, they made a U-turn and took the 2 children into custody. Amartya and Aparajita were taken away from Priyadarshini. Australia's Department of Communities and Justice stole the Indian woman's kids. Can you even imagine Priyadarshini and her husband's pain? They did not get any say in their own children's lives. From which school they would attend to where they could go. Priyadarshini lost all her rights over her own children. In fact, the DCJ issued a lookout notice against her and her children so that the family could not travel out of Australia. Priyadarshini was heartbroken, but she had not given up just yet. She sat through custody hearings, tried to convince the Australian government to withdraw her children's citizenship, and that way the family could happily return to India, but all in vain. Disheartened, Priyadarshini decided to return to India alone, but she never made it home. An online hearing for the custody battle was scheduled for the 22nd of August, but the Australian authorities postponed it to November. And that was the last straw for Priyadarshini. Instead of heading to her hometown, she made her way to Belagavi in the South Indian state of Karnataka, and there she jumped into a reservoir and killed herself. Her children could not even come to attend her funeral. Her husband traveled to India alone to conduct the last rites. A beautiful family was destroyed at the hands of the Australian authorities. A mother lost her children's custody, and then the children lost their mother forever. Why? Just because Australia's healthcare system failed the child, is it? Was Australia too proud to admit this? Instead, it broke a family. It scarred the children forever. Who gave Australia the right to do this? And before dying, Priyadarshini sent off her bags to her parents. This note was found in her luggage. Let me read it out for you. Our lives are threatened. I am compelled to end my life for the survival of my children and husband Lingaraj. I am accepting my death for the good of my family. From 2021 to the present day, Australia's Department of Communities and Justice has ruined my family. The residents of Wellesley Street in Sydney have harassed us. Priyadarshini had alleged that the family of a police officer had been troubling her, that they had poisoned the water supply to her house. But were Priyadarshini's pleas heard? No, they weren't. She died trying to get her children's custody back. And now that she is gone, Australia's DCJ has woken up. It has offered condolences and said that it is assessing the return of full custody to Priyadarshini's husband. A woman had to die for this to happen. And you know what's even worse? Even the children do end up returning home. Their home would never be the same again. That home will not have a mother. The children will not have a mother. No country gets to separate children from their mother. This is criminal and nothing short of cultural prejudice. I doubt Australia would have done this to a white family. Did Priyadarshini and her family pay the price for being brown-skinned and of Indian origin? Because you see, she will not be the first then. Something similar happened in the case of Ariha Shah. We told you about this. In the year 2021, baby Ariha was just 7 months old. She was hospitalized for an accidental injury. And soon after, she was taken away by the childcare authorities in Germany. No charges were filed against the parents. And yet, 2 years on, Ariha has not been returned to her parents. She is living in foster care in Berlin. Do you think a foster family would be looking after her better than her own parents? Imagine the plight of Ariha's mother and of others like her. They live in a foreign country that is poles apart from their culture. They raise their children with no extended family to support, and welfare services just decide one day that they are not good mothers and take away their children. Why do Indian mothers have to face this? Why do white countries feel so entitled to make decisions for them? What is it if not cultural prejudice? Do these people have the right to break a family, to separate children from their mothers? These repeated cases also beg another question. Why do Indian mothers continue to go to such societies that don't understand their culture? What is the fascination of relocating all about if your family is at risk in that new country? Something to think about. One nation, one election. Chances are you have heard or read or at least spoken about it in the last 24 hours. The question is it really happening? Is India moving towards holding one election? And is it possible for the central and the state governments to hold simultaneous polls? More importantly, can a country as diverse as India even hold simultaneous elections? And if so, what does it mean for the world's largest and most complex democracy? Let's find out. Reports say that the Modi government has constituted a committee. It is reportedly headed by India's former president, Ram Nath Kovind. The panel has reportedly been tasked with exploring the possibility of one nation, one election. And the timing is very interesting. The report comes after India's Parliamentary Affairs Minister, Prahlad Joshi, announced that the government has called for a special session of the Indian Parliament. It is a 5-day session and will begin on the 18th of September. And what's the agenda of this session, you ask? The answer is, we do not know. Nothing has been made public as of now, and government officials are extremely tight-lipped about it. And this, you see, is only adding to the speculation. A part of the speculation is that the government wants to table the one nation, one election bill. Again, keep in mind that nothing is confirmed as of now, but if this does happen, then you should not be surprised. Let me tell you why. You see, India's Prime Minister, Narendra Modi, has for long advocated this concept. In fact, one nation, one election was listed in the BJP's 2014 election manifesto. So what really is one nation, one election all about? The idea essentially is about reconstructing the Indian election cycle. It aims to synchronize elections at both the state and the central levels simultaneously. The concept is to hold these elections together, either on a single day or within a specific time frame. But why does the government want to hold elections for states and the center together? Because there are numerous advantages. Let's start off with the cost reduction. You see, conducting multiple elections together will reduce the cost. 2, a single election would theoretically ease the burden on the administrative and the security forces who are otherwise engaged multiple times for election duties. Number 3, the focus on governance. Some argue that one nation, one election could also help the governments. How exactly? Those in power will be able to concentrate more on governance rather than constantly being in election mode. You see, being in election mode can hinder policy implementation. Point number 4 being increased voter turnout. Simultaneous polls could also increase the voter turnout. It will be more convenient, perhaps, for people to cast multiple ballots at once. These benefits do make a compelling case for considering the concept of one nation, one election. The concept, after all, is not new to India. In fact, it is as old as our constitution. After the constitution was adopted in the year 1950, polls to both the Lok Sabha and all the state assemblies were held simultaneously. Every 5 years, between 1951 and 1967, India voted simultaneously for the centre and the states. In 1952, 1957, 1962 and 1967, the process ended as new states were formed and some old ones were reorganized. It was completely discontinued after some legislative assemblies were dissolved in 1968 to 69, and the idea to revert to simultaneous polls was first suggested in the Election Commission's report in 1983, and then the Law Commission proposed to bring it back in its report in 1999. The most recent push came in 2014. The BJP had made a strong pitch for one nation, one election in its election manifesto. And then came the Law Commission's draft resolution in 2018. It backed the idea and recommended changes to the electoral laws as well as constitutional provisions. The Law Commission of India says simultaneous elections can only be held through appropriate amendments to the Constitution. It also said that at least 50% of the states must ratify the constitutional amendment. But this is where the challenges end. The biggest challenge is synchronizing the terms of various state assemblies with those of the Lok Sabha. Regional political parties argue that holding multiple elections simultaneously would hinder their prospects. Why exactly? Because they won't be able to emphasize on local issues prominently. Not just that, there is a fear that they will not be able to compete with national parties, be it in terms of financial resources or the election strategies. Is this a valid point? Yes, of course. But here's what else is also true. In a democracy as diverse and complex as India, it is hard to get every part to agree to a change. And the idea of one nation, one election is no exception. All the more given the timing of it all. 5 major states are scheduled to hold elections later this year, and then you have the Lok Sabha elections coming up next year. At a time like this, every announcement will be seen with additional skepticism. Meanwhile, New Delhi is gearing up to host the G20 summit. Preparations are underway. From advancing its infrastructure to preparing its elite security forces, the capital is planning to overtake the standards of the previous G20 hosts. World leaders will be attending that G20 summit, and from the moment they land to the moment they leave, India has planned an exquisite experience for all those leaders. Our next report telling you all that you need to know about the G20 summit preparations.
Let's give you a sneak peek into what awaits the world leaders. To make the visit as smooth as possible, the government has announced a public holiday in the capital from 8th to the 10th of September, which means that banks, financial institutions, commercial establishments, and educational institutions will be closed. This is to make travel smoother for the G20 members, and they won't have to face unnecessary traffic. The Delhi police has also set up a virtual help desk to help delegates with real-time traffic updates. The police say, and I quote, As world leaders gather to address global challenges, our website will provide you with traffic information, road closures, alternative routes and travel advisories to help you navigate the city efficiently and avoid potential delays, unquote. The Delhi Police is the nodal agency for security arrangements. Reports say that 50 teams of the Central Reserve Police Force will be continuously working on ground. That will include over 1,000 personnel. Nearly 300 bulletproof luxury vehicles have also been prepared. In order to ensure rapid air response capabilities, fighter aircraft such as Rafales have been placed on heightened alert status. The Air Force has activated air bases both within and in proximity to the national capital. Helicopter slithering exercises have already been taking place in the capital. Over 50 ambulances will be stationed at the G20 summit venue, hotels and the airport. Foolproof arrangements have been made at the Ram Manohar Lohia Hospital and the All India Institute of Medical Sciences, which are the top high-class hospitals of the capital. In addition to all the emergency arrangements, a state-of-the-art medical emergency facility has been set up at the G20 summit venue. When it comes to the guest stay in the capital, multiple luxury hotels have been earmarked for the attendees. Rooms have been booked in leading luxury hotels like ITC Moria, Taj Palace, Shangri-La, The Imperial, Le Méridien and JW Marriott. Delicious food dishes await the G20 attendees. Bharat Mandapam, the G20 main venue, will host the main lunch. Most of the special courses will be vegetarian and will be prepared by ITC Moria chefs. ITC Moria, a luxury chain of hotels, has been given the catering contract for the event. A unique G20 digital museum called Culture Corridor has been established. It will have at least one key artifact or its digital replica from all member nations and the 9 guest countries. The museum refers to the idea of having both physical and digital components. Reports say that the G20 summit is expected to cost nearly $112 million. Over 20 state departments are involved in the preparations and they have contributed their monetary share. The Public Works Department takes the lead with over $54 million, most of which was concentrated on the airport and main venue enhancements. The Municipal Corporation of Delhi used nearly $30 million and the Department of Tourism used $8.5 million. It surely seems like the nation is not sparing a penny to make G20 a memorable event. The capital is right now carrying out rehearsals to ensure smooth proceedings. While what may seem like a ton of preparations, the G20 summit will be a new milestone for India. Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
And since we are talking about the G20 summit, how can we not discuss the guest list? US President Joe Biden will be there, Emmanuel Macron will be there, Anthony Albanese will be attending as well, besides several other attendees and dignitaries. Xi Jinping, the president of China, though, may not come. And we told you about this on Thursday. We also discussed why, the possible reasons behind his absence, his possible absence. Is it because India is hosting the event? Is it because he is afraid of being ignored? Is it because he fears China's actions might get called out? We discussed almost every possibility. And tonight we come to you with a new one. Is Xi Jinping planning to perhaps skip the summit due to Taiwan, due to the activism of India and other G20 nations? Is this the real reason behind his planned absence at that summit? And it could be if we go by some recent developments. Last month, the former chiefs of India's 3 services were in Taipei to engage with various sections of the Taiwanese leadership and also to express India's views to them. This included Admiral Karambir Singh, the former chief of the Indian Navy, General M.M. Naravane, the former chief of the Indian Army, and Air Chief Marshal R.K.S. Bhaduria, the former chief of Air Staff of the Indian Air Force. The 3 of them represented India in Taipei at the Ketagalan Forum's 2023 Indo-Pacific Security Dialogue. And their presence there resulted in a lot of speculation, especially about India's stand on Chinese aggression against Taiwan. Remember, the Indian armed forces have been locked in a face-off with the PLA in Ladakh and other places along the line of actual control. Taiwan also is suffering due to aggressive Chinese tactics. So this move was seen as India directly backing Taiwan against China. 3 weeks on, Xi Jinping is likely and could be skipping the G20 summit. So we must ask, are these 2 developments linked? Has India's support towards Taiwan rattled China? Has the presence of India's former defense chiefs unnerved Xi Jinping? And as we ponder upon these questions, let's also look at what the other G20 nations are doing regarding Taiwan. We'll start off with the UK. Its Foreign Minister, James Cleverly, is on a visit to Beijing, and as he attends official engagements back home, the British parliamentarians have triggered a firestorm. Have a look at this report. For the first time ever, the British Parliament has referred to Taiwan as an independent country. The new language was adopted in a report by the Foreign Affairs Committee, and this is one of the most influential committees in the House of Commons. Reports say its decision could risk a stinging backlash from Beijing. And next, we have the United States. On Wednesday, the U.S. President approved military aid for Taiwan. Do you know which program he approved this under? The Foreign Military Financing, or FMF program. This is usually used for sovereign states. In other words, this move will not only send millions in military aid to Taiwan, but will also recognize Taiwan as a sovereign state. And next we have Australia. Reports in the Taiwanese media saying that a group of Australian parliamentarians are expected to visit Taiwan somewhere next month. The 10-member delegation will apparently include lawmakers from both sides of the political spectrum. And then we have France. Earlier this month, it said it had received EU authorization to provide 1.5 billion euros in subsidies to a Taiwanese company. And France is reportedly building its first electric vehicle battery factory with this company. So it's not just India. Almost every major G20 nation is engaging with Taiwan, and these engagements have in fact picked up pace. Clearly, the developments might have upset the Chinese president. They might have instilled a fear in him that the summit could be used to sideline Beijing, that India might take the home field advantage to take on China on sensitive issues. India's Adani Group has been gripped by another controversy. The Guardian has accused the conglomerate of stock manipulation. It says the Adani Group secretly invested hundreds of millions of dollars into the Indian stock market and bought its own shares. And who was in on it? The Adani family, their associates, the group's shell companies. The report says the Adanis may have spent years secretly buying stock in the Adani Group's own companies and thereby inflating the conglomerate's value on the market. New documents have been obtained by the Organized Crime and Corruption Reporting Project. These papers reveal details of an undisclosed and complex offshore operation in Mauritius. It was seemingly controlled by Adani associates. What for? To boost the group's share prices from 2013 to 2018. And up until now, this offshore network had been impenetrable. The said records also provide evidence of the founder, Gautam Adani's elder brother, Vinod Adani's involvement in the offshore operations, even though the conglomerate insists otherwise. The trove of documents laying out a complex web of companies that date back to 2010. That's when two associates of the Adani family began setting up offshore shell companies. Where exactly? In Mauritius, the British Virgin Islands, and the UAE. And who are these associates? One is Chang Chung Ling, a Taiwan-based investor. Another is Nasser Ali Shaban Ali from the UAE. The two established 4 companies, and through them, they pumped hundreds of millions of dollars in the Indian stock market, 2013 onwards. The funds then spent years acquiring shares in 4 Adani-listed companies: Adani Enterprises, Adani Ports and Special Economic Zone, Adani Power, and later Adani Transmission. The investment decisions were overseen by a Dubai-based company, and guess what? That company was also run by a known employee of Vinod Adani. The documents clearly indicate foul play. So what does this mean for the Adani Group? You see, Indian market rules prevent stock manipulation and regulate public shareholdings of companies. And they state that 25% of a company's shares must be kept free float, which means that they are available for public trade on the stock exchange. 75% can be held by promoters. But these promoters need to declare their direct involvement with the company. The Adani Group has acknowledged Vinod Adani as a promoter only recently. The offshore enterprises, however, have been operating for over a decade. And at the peak of their investment, Ali and Chang held between 8% and 13.5% of the free floating shares. And if their holdings were classified as under Vinod Adani proxies, the Adani Group's promoter holdings would have breached the 75% limit. The conglomerate has been facing fire since the beginning of this year, in fact. In January, short seller Hindenburg accused the Adani Group of pulling off the largest con in corporate history. It alleged that there had been brazen stock manipulation and accounting fraud. It also accused the group of using opaque offshore companies to buy its own shares. The new findings are also along the same line. And soon after the Hindenburg report, the Securities and Exchange Board of India, or SEBI, also launched a probe. And just days ago, Reuters reported that SEBI has found some violation of the regulations, and some of the allegations are still being investigated. The Supreme Court of India is set to hear the matter soon. SEBI has no plans to make the report public until it passes orders on the Adani investigation. But as the probe digs deeper and more reports come up, trouble only seems to be mounting for the Adani Group. Have you heard about fast fashion? Do you know how much global waste it actually produces? Now it seems like big clothing brands are realizing the effect of fast fashion, the consequences. And brands are coming up with initiatives like garment sorting and recycling, that is in response to a barrage of new EU proposals to curb the fashion industry's initiatives and moves. But let's just get to the basics. What really is fast fashion? Basically, cheap and trendy clothes that meet the consumer demand. And the idea is to get the newest styles on the market as fast as possible. Most often, shoppers buy them, wear the clothes for a short period of time, and discard them as soon as a new trend enters the picture. Fast fashion has created a toxic system of overproduction and consumption. And this has made fashion one of the world's largest polluters. But big brands like H&M and Mango are setting up NGOs to manage clothing waste. They plan to ramp up garment sorting, processing, and recycling. But is sorting and recycling enough? Although clothing brands are introducing some changes, experts say more needs to be done, a lot more. You see, despite efforts by NGOs and big brands, in Europe only 5.2 million tons of clothing waste is recycled and millions of tons ends up as landfill at landfills every year. Have a look at these images of waste mountains. Massive heaps of waste which contain a significant amount of textiles. Most of the waste mountains belong to South Asia and Africa. Why is that? Because they have been used as dumping grounds. And this forces the less developed nations to deal with the fast fashion waste. Let's just take Kenya as an example. In the year 2019, the country imported 185,000 tons of second-hand clothes, out of which nearly 40% of them had no market value, which meant up to 74,000 tons was just textile waste. Studies say nearly 200 tons of textile waste gets dumped, burnt, or sent to overflowing dump sites in the country every day. So how can countries manage and reduce the waste? Some experts believe that recycling could be the answer. Reports say that in Europe, 14 textile recycling companies plan to increase their recycling capacity. The EU aims that by 2030, all textile products sold would be made of recycled fibers, as well as being durable, repairable, and recyclable. But some reports say that brands need to change their linear business models. Global fashion brands need to produce clothes which are designed to be of better quality, long-lasting, repairable, reusable. The Greenpeace organization saying that the global north, as it's called, needs to change its trade practices with the south and develop clean manufacturing of local textiles rather than making them a dumping ground. Although the EU is coming up with new textile strategies, a global initiative against fast fashion is the urgent need of the hour. Let's now shift our focus to the world of sport. An Iranian weightlifter has received a lifetime ban from competing. Did he make a foul comment? Was he violent towards his counterparts? No, he simply shook hands with an Israeli athlete. His nation has also fired the head of the weightlifting team. Iran has called the weightlifter's action an unforgiving gesture. But why would Iran take such a drastic step against a sportsman? Where do you even draw the line between sportsmanship and geopolitics? Our next report getting you all the details.